Hello all. In this video we are going to talk about the effect of new keyword while copying the objects. First of all, let's create a class. Let's call it as A. We will use this constructor to initialize the variables. Inside the constructor, let me print a line. Constructor called. Let's take a help of a static variable, static integer, let's say count, and one id variable for object. So what we will do is each time this constructor is getting called, we will increment the count variable by 1 and we will display the same called cnt times. Let's initialize the static variable to 0, and what we will do is each time the object is getting created, we will say id is equal to the present value of cnt. So let's create object now. Let's say a t1 temporary object 1, and let's create another object temporary object 2, and let's print this both objects value. t1 dot id is equal to t1 dot id let me copy the line, and on this line we will say t2 dot id is equal to t2 dot id. So let's verify whether it's working fine or not. Made mistake, so I have to use a double colon. Okay, let's compile. So now you can see that the constructor is called 2 times as we have created 2 objects, and t1.id is initialized to 1 and t2.id is initialized to 2. So what has happened is when we created first object, the constructor gets called. So cnt, it's a static variable, count is a static variable, so it's the same copy will be shared by all objects. So default value for cnt was set to 0. So when the constructor got called, when we created object t1, the cnt got incremented to 1, and that one value we are copying it to the id. Now whose id? The present object which is in picture. Now who is in picture? The t1 has called the constructor, so t1's id is initialized to the value of count, which is incremented by 1. So initially it was 0, it became 1, and that 1 is copied to the id. Then we are creating object 2. So second time the constructor gets called. As soon as the second time the constructor gets called, the same copy, which is common among all objects because it is static, gets incremented one more time. So the present value was 1, incremented by 1 becomes 2, and this 2 we are copying it inside id. Now whose id? This time this id is of second object, which is t2. That's why t1.id is printing 1 and t2.id is printing 2. So 2 times constructor was called. So we have seen that constructor called one time when the first time constructor got called. The second time the constructor got called when we created the object t2, that time the output was constructor called second time. Now what we will do is we will say temporary variable 3 is equal to t2. Now we are creating another object, new object of class A. We are calling this object as t3, but we are not creating it in a plain way. We are using assignment or copying method, and we are copying the object t2 inside t3. Now let's see what is effect of this. So let me compile. Let's run. So you can see that the constructor is still called only 2 times. For the object t3, the constructor is not called. So whether the object t3 is variable is initialized or not, let's verify. t3.id is equal to t3.id and line. Now if we compile and run, you will see that the t3.id is having the same value as of t2.id. So it's when we are assigning the earlier created object to the new object definition, that time the constructor is not getting called, but existing objects all values are getting copied into the new object. So constructor is not called while creating t3. Whether destructor will be called for t3 or not, let's verify. So we have three objects with us, t1 and t2. Only two times the constructor has been called, which is for t1 and t2. When we copy t2 into t3, the constructor is not called. So let's verify how many times the destructor is getting called. So let's say called, and let's run, compile and run. So you can see that the constructor is called only two times, but the destructor is called three times. It clearly means that there are three objects in picture, t1, t2 and t3. But as you are copying the existing values of t2 into t3, the constructor is not called for t3. Now let's modify the value of id variable for t3 objects. Let's say t3.id is equal to 3, and then let's print all objects id variables. So let's compile it again and run. So now you can see that t1.id was 1, t2.id was 2, t3.id was earlier 2 because you copied t2 into t3. So the same id was used by t3 initially. Then you have modified t3.id to 3, and that change has took place. At the same time, t2.id still have its original value, which is 2. So when you change t3.id, it has changed only the value of id variable of t3 object, and there is no effect on t2. So we are going to make a small change in the program. What we will do is, we will instead of creating id variable like plain id variable, we are going to make use of pointer variable, and we will use new keyword to initialize this id variable. Let's start. So what I'll do is I will put a asterisk symbol. Now id has become a pointer variable, so we can't do it like this. So what we can do is id is equal to new int. So we are now using new keyword to allocate a memory to the id, and then dereference it, id is equal to cnt. While accessing the variable, now we have to take care that we have to add a asterisk symbol every time we are referring to this id variable. So let me use the asterisk symbol while assigning also. I'll put one more cout statement. Let me say, after changing t3.id, okay, end line. Now let's close the earlier execution and run this. Now you can see that after changing t3.id, the two id variables are changed. t2 has also changed its id value. Now this wasn't expected. So this is the effect of new keyword while using it to initialize the variable. So if let me restore the earlier program quickly. Like if I just remove this, let's put a comment on this. Let's remove the asterisk symbol from entire program. Now if I run this again, you can see that now if you change t3, only t3 is changing and there is no effect on t2. And a moment ago you have seen that if we just add this new keyword, then if you change t3, it also changes t2. So let's discuss what is the effect of this new keyword while copying the object. So we'll start this discussion in the next video. Thank you.